you would be opening your books to Lesson 5.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Lesson 5, and we're going to begin on page 5 of Lesson 5 tonight, talking about the subject of genetics. It's good to see everybody. Still got some rolling in. There's Jared. It's good to see Jared. Jared's been gone for a while. Glad he's back with us. Need to keep Elton in our prayers. Elton found out this afternoon he has COVID. He wasn't feeling well, thought he had a head cold, and he was convinced to take a test, and he did test positive. So he said he still just feels like he has a bad head cold, no major symptoms. But let's keep Elton in our prayers that it stays minor. As of this time, Ona Mae is feeling fine. She does not have any symptoms, so hopefully she'll be able to avoid that. But there is a new strain of COVID that's going around, and there's several people in our community that have started to test positive for that. I know Danny Brown had it a couple of weeks back, and there's been several others. But everyone that I've talked to said that it's not I guess, a very severe strain. It's mainly like head cold symptoms. But let's keep all of them in our prayers. Carrie, would you lead us in prayer tonight?
Father in heaven, we're thankful for all the blessings you give us, overwhelmed by how much you provide for us, especially the spiritual blessing. We are so thankful for Jesus, for your love of sending him, and for his willingness to go to the cross. We pray, Father, for those that aren't able to be with us tonight in our Bible study. Especially pray for Elton as he has found out he has COVID, and we pray that it will not be severe, and that he'll be able to get well soon. We pray for others we know that are dealing with health issues. Thankful for those that have recovered, doing much better. We pray for Danny Johnson, know that he's still in serious condition, and we pray that it be your will, he might get better. And pray for Kathy as she is concerned and cares for him. Pray, Father, for Josh as he directs our study tonight, and pray that we can learn and strengthen our faith and knowledge and be able to tell others. We are thankful, Father, for our family and Byron here. We're thankful for your wisdom in setting all this up and establishing a church where we can help each other as the world seems to be growing further and further away from your word. These things we pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about the subject of genetics, continuing this look at creation versus evolution. And what I hope to do tonight is to get finished with Lesson 5, go through our review quickly, possibly get started on Lesson 6. But some of this that we're going to be seeing, and I've mentioned this on other lessons as well, some of this gets very deep, gets very tedious, and to be perfectly honest with you, it goes over my head. And so a lot of this material, I've tried to take it and simplify it down to the point that I could understand it, and hopefully we'll be able to still get the whole picture of what we're looking here without actually digging in real deep on a lot of this material. Because really, whenever we talk about the subject of genetics, we find that this is a subject that really is still being developed. It's still being discovered. I had a doctor friend one time tell me that, genetics is one of those fields of medicine that's still kind of in the realm of mystery. They still don't fully understand how all of it works. But scientists have been able to prove that every living thing, plant, animal, human being, every living thing has what's known as a genetic code. It has a certain chemical makeup that is the essence of life, as they often refer to it. And this is where those who believe in creation are able to look at this genetic code and use this as an argument for this idea or this theory of creation. And that is the fact that every living thing contains certain identifying factors that set that species apart from every other species. For example, the genetics of a human being are going to be different than the genetics of a dog. The genetics of a dog will be different from the genetics of certain plants and trees and flowers. Those genetics are identifiers that point out that specific species. But also, scientists have proven that this genetic code is unchanging. That this genetic code, that as it has been established, has never changed. Now, what we're going to see as we go through this study, now there can be what's referred to as mutations in those genes that make up this genetic code, and we'll talk about that just a little bit tonight. But there has never been any type of documented evidence that shows that the genetic code of a species has ever changed, which has caused the evolution of another species out of an existing species. The genetic code of a species remains exclusive to that species. The way that our book describes it, it says that it's been proven, though, that genetic studies, or through genetic studies, that this genetic code does not change. And the examples it gives, it says that buttercup flowers only produce buttercups, sparrows only produce sparrows, and human beings only produce human beings. Yes, ma'am.
Just tonight, last night and tonight, there was a baby giraffe that was born in Tennessee in a zoo. He has no spots. And scientists from all over the world are trying to figure out how come he is spotless. And so, don't know.
Well, that's going to fall under what we're going to see in this subject of genetic mutations.
Okay.
Something happened in its development that caused that particular identifier in its genetic code to be altered. And we'll see some other examples where you see that kind of thing being done. But now evolutionary scientists, they have been unable to prove, based upon their belief of evolution, that one species is able to change into another species. And the reason for that is because of this genetic code. You look at the genetic code of a human being, and it is completely different from the genetic code of every other living thing. Now, one thing that we could also throw out there, kind of in line with somewhat of the moral climate that we see taking place, you take the genetic code of a biological human male. And it does not matter what chemicals, what hormones, what surgical procedures, it does not matter what is done to that biological human male. You cannot change that genetic code to identify that person as a biological human female. It's impossible. It cannot be done. But where evolutionary scientists struggle and where creationists look at this as a positive is in the fact that from the time that genetics first began to be studied, there has never been a change in genetic code ever observed that actually altered an entire species. It just does not happen. But the main argument, and I mentioned this just briefly a moment ago, but the main argument that they will use to try to defend this view that over time a species can change, the genetic code of a species can change, is in the form of what's referred to as genetic mutations. Most of the time, whenever we hear this designation used, we hear it used in reference to the medical field. We know a lot of the diseases that are out there today, a lot of, for example, birth defects and things of that nature, are able to be traced back to genetic mutations. But the thing with this genetic code is that we see hereditary changes that come to that genetic code over time. The species does not change, but the specific identifiers that make me Josh, that makes Tom Tom, that makes Mary Mary, those have changed over time. And what has brought that about? Well, there's certain things about me that I get from my dad. There are certain things about me that I get from my mom. There are certain things about each one of us that we can trace back generations. Certain physical features, hair color, eye color, the composition of our body, our build. So many of those things we look at and we say, well, those are genetic identifiers that have come about through heredity. But does that mean that I'm not a human because I don't look like Barb? Or that I'm not a human because I don't look like Louise? Or that my hair is a different color than Tom's? No. We're still human beings. We still have the same basic genetic code that says that we are human beings. But we have certain identifiers. That's our DNA. Certain identifiers that set us apart from everyone else. But that main genetic code remains the same. And we talked about this a little bit, I believe it was in last week's lesson, when we talked about some of those adaptations that have happened among species through the years. Changing of colors. So we talked about the peppered moths, that went from being a white color to a darker color. We talked about those who, based upon the environments that they live in, that their body will actually change over time to better adapt to those situations. These are all changes that can take place in the genetic code of an individual, but the species itself is not changing. The individual identifiers are changing. But what causes these mutations? That's what scientists have tried to discover. And that's where they think they're going to find an answer to the question. What causes these genetic mutations? Well, most of them are natural occurring instances where, mainly when it's a developing child, a child that is still in the womb, their DNA does not develop perfectly. There are certain missing chromosomes, certain missing enzymes, things of that nature, that cause those certain identifiers. We're not talking about the code itself, this genetic code that makes that person a human being. But we're talking about some of those identifiers that causes changes to take place. Most mutations come in this form. Just accidents or mistakes in the developmental process. And of course, science has proven that there are a number of things that can cause those situations to take place. I'll share an example with you here in just a moment. But another of those, and this is one that I'm sure that many of you are very familiar with, there can be external influences that lead to that. One of the main ones that we hear about today are those who have come into contact with certain chemicals. We think about those, for instance, who served in Vietnam, who come into contact with Agent Orange and other chemicals of that nature. We think about farmers who have come into contact with with DDT or have come into contact with Roundup and the effects that it has not only on them, but the effects that they see being passed down to their children. Yes, ma'am.
It also affects if you're Roundup, because this happened to my dad on the farm. The county would come along and spray on the roadsides, but some of the chemicals would get into the field, and it would affect the corn. It would affect our wheat, our hay, everything, which affects the animals, which affects our milk, which affects the people that drink the milk.
That's right. And so, as we see here, we see these external influences that can bring these things about. But what complicates matters even more is that some of these mutations are hereditary. If I come into contact with a certain chemical, or one that has really proven to have one of the greatest effects, is if I come into contact with a large amount of radiation. That the affected genes, those mutated genes, can actually be passed down to future generations. And what even gets even more strange is some of these occurrences are even found to skip generations. To where maybe I had it, but it doesn't go to my children, but then my grandchildren would have it. And so this is why I say, and like my doctor friend said, this is kind of one of those mystical things that we don't really understand how all of this works in that regard. This is still a developing field. But let me share an example with you. And this is one that some of you know about. I don't know that I've ever shared it to this extent. But I think all of you that are here tonight know about Christy, and my oldest daughter. She passed away at a year old from a rare brain disease. Well, after we found out the disease that she had, we saw a genetics doctor at Arkansas Children's Hospital. And one of the first things that he asked us when he walked into the room, it really caught us off guard. He walked into the room and he said, "Do you all know that both of you have Orthodox Judaism in your background somewhere?" Well, of course, here we were, Christy and I both, several generations of Randolph County stock. There's no Orthodox Judaism around here. But he went on to explain that the disease that she had, the only way that it could come about or be produced in a child was the mother and father both had to have a mutated gene that only could come from Orthodox Judaism. And he went on to explain that how that came about was in Europe back during the days of the bubonic plague. Orthodox Jews had such a strict cleanliness regimen that they actually developed an immunity to the bubonic plague. That immunity caused a mutated gene. That mutated gene is hereditary. It passes down to every generation of their descendants. And when you have a man and a woman who both have that mutated gene, there is a 25% chance of this disease taking place among their children. So, of course, when we think about things like this, it's amazing the discoveries that have been able to come about. But whenever we think about the fact that there could be things going on in this genetic code within the DNA makeup of each and every one of us that we have no idea of. We have no clue what's taking place. But the thing that we do know is this. The DNA code, the genetic code that makes us human beings is not changing. That's not changing. These other things, yes, they can change over time. These mutated genes can come about. But where evolutionists look at this they say there's 3 types of genetic mutations: good, bad, and neutral. Neutral mutations, they say, really don't have any type of impact whatsoever. They're there, but there's not really any signs that point to the fact that anything has taken place. Bad mutations are 99% of the mutations that take place. And these bad mutations are ones, like in the example that I shared with you with my daughter Hannah. They are the most common. And they are ones that affect the species but do not change the species. What they refer to as a bad mutation are any of those things that I mentioned to you earlier. Mom and Dad had blonde hair and blue eyes. So I have blonde hair and blue eyes. That's a bad mutation. Both of my parents are tall, therefore I'm tall. In their eyes, that is a bad mutation. And the reason they call it a bad mutation is because it does not support their view. Their view is that these mutations are changing that genetic code over time, slowly changing you into a different species. Well, it's a bad mutation because it's proving that the genetic code is not changing, but we're seeing those adaptations. We're seeing those hereditary DNA aspects changing over time. So they look at that and they say, well, that's a bad mutation because it does not support their view. So what would be considered a good mutation? Well, a good mutation would be one that produces a positive impact upon the species. Something that a scientist would look at and say, well, looky there, that shows that the species is evolving. They are advancing. And evolutionists hold that eventually, and since these good mutations are few and far between, that we're looking at probably billions of years before human beings evolve into something else. But eventually there's going to be enough of these good mutations that our genetic code as human beings is going to change, and we're going to evolve into something different, something bigger, something better, something smarter, something stronger. Because as we talked about last week, natural selection is survival of the fittest. Whatever's the strongest is what will live on. But here's something that we need to keep in mind. All genetic mutations are extremely rare. Good, bad, neutral, all are extremely rare. And there has never been a documented case of a genetic mutation in any living being, plant, animal, human. There's never been a documented case of a genetic mutation actually altering the genetic code of the species. Physical features, yes. The lifespan or the appearance or the abilities, the physical abilities of that specific plant or that specific human being, yes. A disease could form in this individual. A birth defect could form in this individual. But it's not going to affect every person. And so in looking at this, rather than seeing this as proof of the validity of evolution, we actually see an orderly system. One that had an initial start. One that has continued unchanged. God created all things and set those things into motion. Unchanged since the beginning. All right, any questions or comments before we look at the review? Yes, ma'am.
All of these changes that we have, different color hair, diseases, all that is genetic, but we are all still human, no matter what happens.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That is true. The species does not change. We're all still human beings. Even though we may look different, we may talk different, Those are those hereditary aspects that we talked about. Those things that we got from mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. All the way back to the Orthodox Jews somewhere back in our background.
I have a comment.
Okay?
So when you hear these, what are they, the different people that are changing themselves, it's still human, but wouldn't it still go back to, if you really tore all of the fluff away, they'd still be a male?
Yes. And that's what I mentioned earlier, that genetic code is unable to change.
Exactly. Even though they say that they're not.
Right.
When you get down to it and you look at the core.
Well, and Barb, it goes hand in hand with those today who are identifying as cats or as dogs or whatever. In their mind, they have some type of mental illness or some type of issue there that's causing them to think that. But that's not changing the fact that they're an actual human being.
Exactly.
You know, we can think that we're whatever we want to think. But that doesn't change who we really are. Okay, let's look at our review. True or false? The universe originated in one of two ways, creation or evolution. True or false? No, that is true. That is true. Remember, it presents this as two theories.
Okay.
We consider the evidence for whichever one we believe is the truth. But ultimately, the universe originated in one of those two ways. Number two, both evolution and creation may be called scientific models. Actually, that is true. They can be called scientific models. They can be viewed as scientific models. They can both be called theories. But we accept creation as fact based upon faith. The creation-evolution issue is really insignificant and does not matter much. That's false. False. It does matter. Number four, creation is recognized today by many scientists as a legitimate scientific concept. That is true. You remember last week we talked about the fact that there's a growing number of people that would love to see both of these ideas taught. Let the individual decide what they're going to believe, but present both sides. 5. The law of biogenesis says that in nature all life comes from pre-existing life. That is true. Life cannot come from non-life. 6. Evolution could have occurred without spontaneous generation. We didn't talk about that too much. We'll talk about it a little bit more in a future lesson. But basically it's this idea that originally there was no life, but then the Big Bang took place and everything was in such a perfect system that life just spontaneously created. Okay, well, we know that is false. Evolution could not have occurred without that taking place first. Number 7, in laboratory experiments, scientists have produced life from non-life. False. They've tried and tried and tried, and they've failed. 8, natural selection does not explain the creation of a new species. That is true. That is true because in natural selection, essentially it says that whatever the strongest members of that species are, they are going to survive, while the weaker ones of that species will die. Okay, multiple choice. Which of the following answers are not a quality of mutation? They're rare, they're random, mostly all good, or they're selective and organized. Which is not true? That they are mostly all good. C. Remember I mentioned the fact that they are mostly all bad mutations. Mostly all good would be the wrong answer. Number 2, evolution claims that the universe is A, self-contained, B, not self-contained, C, well-designed, or D, created. It is A. Self-contained, meaning we don't need any external influence to get this world. This world has produced itself. Which essentially says God didn't do it. God's not a part of this world, so He didn't do it. Creation claims that the universe is A, self-contained, B, not self-contained, C, not well-designed, D, random. Well, it's the opposite of what we just answered. It would be B, not self-contained. God created the heavens and the earth, the supreme being. Number 4, in 1981, an Associated Press NBC News poll. How many people wanted creation taught alongside evolution? Was it 8.6%, 39%, 86%, or 44%? It is C, 86%. This was in 1981. 86%. But then when we look at number 5, in a 1991 Gallup poll, how many people believed in a recent creation of man? 47%. 47%. Well, this whole idea of a recent creation of man, and we've not really had time to discuss that. We'll discuss it more in depth later on. But it's this idea, and most of those who are proponents of creationism claim that this earth is only about 6,000 years old. That man has not been on this earth for millions and billions of years. That we're talking about thousands of years, not millions and billions of years. Well, in 1991, about half of the population believed that man has only been on earth a short period of time. Okay, fill in the blanks. And I'll just give you the answer on these rather than try to call these out. Number 1, there are only 2 possibilities concerning origins. Number 2, both evolution and creation may be called scientific models, since both are used to explain and predict scientific facts. 3, in the field of biology, one of the most commonly accepted and widely used laws of science is the law of biogenesis. Number 4, evolution could not have occurred without spontaneous generation. Number 5, no one ever has produced a single kind by natural selection. Or you might also put a single species by natural selection. Number 6, mutations are random, mutations are very rare, and good mutations are very, very rare.
What was it? Go over that again.
Mutations are random, mutations are very rare, and good mutations are very, very rare.
Okay.
All right, matching. Let's go down the right-hand side. We have life comes from non-life. That would be number 4, spontaneous generation. B, the universe is not self-contained, would be number 2, creation. C, the universe is self-contained, would be number 1, evolution. D, genetic changes that are mostly harmful, would be number 5, mutations. E, life comes from previous life and produces after its own kind, would be 6, the law of biogenesis. And survival of the fittest, F, would be natural selection, or number 3. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Because we don't have time to go on into the next lesson tonight. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to speak up. I know, like I said, a lot of this is pretty deep stuff, and it's stuff that I wanted to try to get through pretty quickly so that we could get into some other material that I think will actually be more beneficial to us from the standpoint of Christians seeking to defend the view that we have of creationism.
What was the first, and fill in the blank, in the field of number 3? What was that first?
In the field of biology
Biology, okay.
and the law of biogenesis.
I got that.
One is confusing me, but it says there are only, the fill in the blanks, there are only so many possibilities concerning origins. I don't consider evolution a possibility.
Well, I don't either, but from the standpoint of the way that this lesson is presented, it's talking about presenting it to the world as, here's the two ideas that's out there, you accept which one. And so looking at it, say, strictly from a scientific point of view, because that's the way it's looking at it, is a scientific model, then they would say, well, here's the two possibilities. If evolution is not true, then creation must be true. If creation's not true, then evolution has to be the way. And so I see where you're coming from, and I don't really like the way that's worded either, but
It goes along with where is the other one? Number 1, true and false.
right,
I put false. But anyway,
right.
depending on how you look at it.
Okay, any other questions or comments?
I heard missionaries years ago talking about that natural selection versus creation versus whatever. And I heard one missionary say, well, the way I look at it, evolution could have happened because you look at the basic building blocks that you in, that each additional species came from the same basics of building blocks God just improved on. But it took a catalyst, which was God. I don't know if that's a real...
Well, the struggle that I have with that view would be that God created something that was imperfect, and that God had to continue to improve himself over time. And so that would be my only issue with that. And that kind of goes hand in hand. You've heard me mention several times this idea of theistic evolution. This idea that God created things in a certain way, but he set evolution in motion. We really don't see anything that supports that view. But it kind of goes hand in hand with some of these things we've discussed, like the gap theory, that there were spans of time between each day of creation. Once again, there's nothing that attests to that fact. There's nothing that we can look to that we could use as a fact, or even a supporting evidence to say that the days of creation were not literal days, literal 24-hour days as we think of them.
Josh, they also tell you that this world took millions and billions of years to do all this strata in the rocks and all that kind of stuff. But then they found out when Mount St. Helens erupted, within 2 weeks, they had some of the same things that they claimed it took millions of years to happen.
Right.
So it's a matter of what God created and heat and pressure on things. And it doesn't take billions and billions of years like they try to tell us how old this earth is.
That's right. And really, no one has ever developed a good way of measuring age. We've talked about carbon dating some, and with carbon dating, there's been tests where they would take two objects that were known to be the exact same age and run the testing, and they would show to be thousands of years apart in age. I mean, it's not an accurate form of measurement, and nothing has ever been developed that is a good judge of those things. All right, we're going to stop there, and we'll pick back up in lesson 6 next Wednesday night.